The 4th Marine Division saw combat for the first time during the battle for the Japanese-held atolls of Roi and Namur in the Marshalls. As 1943 ended, Admiral Chester W. Nimitz's Central Pacific Offensive was building steam. His forces had seized the Gilberts in November and now aimed at the Marshalls as the next stepping stone toward Tokyo, codenamed Operation Flintlock. The plan ordered Rear Admiral Richmond K. Turner's amphibious force to bypass the Marshalls' stronger outer defenses and strike directly at Kwajalein Atoll in the archipelago's center. Major General Holland M. Smith, commander of V Amphibious Corps, chose the Army's battle-seasoned 7th Infantry Division to capture naval facilities on Kwajalein Island in the southern group, while Major General Harry Schmidt's untried 4th Marine Division, sailing straight from San Diego, was tasked with seizing Roi and Namur and their excellent airfield 44 miles to the north. Roi measures roughly 1 in 200 by 250 yards, only just large, enough for the airfield, and is connected to Namur by a 400-yard causeway and a narrow lagoon-side sand spit. Namur contains about 800 by 900 yards of densely wooded terrain that sheltered the garrison's barracks and other buildings. 35 aircraft and roughly 2,000 personnel from Vice Admiral Moki Yamada's 24th Air Flotilla were based on the islands, supported by a 345-man detachment of the 61st Guard Force and perhaps 1,200 service troops. Roi Namur's defenses included 2 twin 127mm gun batteries, 4 37mm cannons, 19 heavy 132mm machine guns, and 10 20mm ADA guns, most oriented northward to repel a seaward assault, along with 8 blockhouses, 52 pillboxes, scattered general-purpose machine guns, anti-tank ditches, and fighting trenches. After a 2-month air and naval bombardment, Rear Admiral Richmond Kelly Connolly's Task Force 53 closed on January 29, 1944, and began an intense 3-day shelling that showered the defenders with more than 2,655 tons of high explosives. The Navy's earlier 21-second preparatory barrage at Tarawa in November 1943 had been disastrously insufficient, producing 3,178 Marine casualties, so Connolly was determined to eliminate every man, tree, and structure on Roi and Namur. The first objectives, the 5 outlying islets, were taken by the 25th Marines on D-Day, January 31st, with little resistance. Once those were secure, the 14th Marines' howitzers were in place to support the main invasion planned for the next morning. Throughout the night, Navy gunners continued to pound the atolls. Just before dawn on February 1st, the bombardment paused so the lumbering LVTs carrying tanks could move out from the fleet and enter the lagoon. Once those craft were in position, the shelling resumed with renewed ferocity. In the lagoon, the Marines prepared to go ashore. Colonel Louis Jones's 23rd Marines was assigned Roi, with Lieutenant Colonel Juan Hammond's 1st Battalion landing on Red Beach 2 and Lieutenant Colonel Edward Dillon's 2nd Battalion assaulting Red Beach 3 to Hammond's right. Colonel Franklin Hart's 24th Marines would hit Namur at the same time. Hart selected Lieutenant Colonel Austin Brunelli's 3rd Battalion for Green Beach 1 and Lieutenant Colonel Francis Brink's 2nd Battalion for Green Beach 2 to the right of the L-shaped Yokohama pier that marked the battalion boundary. She hour, the assault time, was set for 1,000. Infantry companies were split into boat teams, riflemen, and assault teams, demolition specialists, bazooka crews, and machine gunners, and all troops embarked in LVT-2 landing vehicles tracked. These amphibious tractors, fitted with cleated treads to surmount coral reefs, carried 18 24 men each. 4 companies of armored LVTAs mounted with turreted 37mm guns and machine guns would lead, followed by units in flat-bottom LCVPs, landing craft personnel. The 23rd Marines assault waves were to be carried by the 4th Amphibian Tractor Battalion, while the 24th's waves would ride the 10th Battalion's LVTs. However, the 10th Battalion was exhausted after continuous service the previous day supporting the 25th Marines on the outlying islets. Crews had burned much of their fuel and expended nearly all their energy ferrying men and supplies between the targets. As night fell, many crews could not find their motherships. Some LVTs ran out of gas and lost their bilge pumps. Several swamped and sank in the choppy sea, and others made for nearby shores. By morning, only 62 of the 110 LVTs allocated for the Namur landings were serviceable. As late as 0630, Captain Charles Berkeley Jr.'s Company G, one of Brink's scheduled assault companies for Landing Team 2, could not muster enough craft. So a last-minute swap sent Captain John Ross Jr.'s Company E, originally the battalion reserve, in their place. Berkeley's men had to wait until enough vessels could be gathered. Similar shortages hit Landing Team 3, but Lieutenant Colonel Brunelli improvised by pooling all available amphibious tractors until both assault companies had transport, while his reserve, Company L, remained aboard its LST with no way to embark. Confusion replaced order as the improvised assault waves struggled to form their line of departure, and H-hour was delayed until 1100. Meanwhile, the Navy kept to its timetable. At 0650, Rear Admiral Howard Kingman's fire support unit, one had closed to within 3,000 yards of Namur's ocean beaches to begin the final bombardment, while Rear Admiral Lawrence J. Groover's fire support team, two loosed salvos toward Roi at first light. The 14th Marines howitzers on neighboring islets also opened fire. By then, the Japanese air arm had been neutralized, along with much of the island's communications and command structure, including Admiral Yamada and his staff, all of whom were killed in the collapsing buildings. While that devastation unfolded, naval control officers responsible for lining up the 24th Marines waves were thrown into confusion as unscheduled craft appeared and the units that were supposed to be there were absent. 15 minutes passed with almost no improvement, and there was growing worry that wasted fuel would strand LVTs circling impatiently in the lagoon. The leading landing team still had no proper reserves. Fortunately, the floating reserve, Lieutenant Colonel Aquila's 1st Battalion, was already embarked in LCVPs about 3,000 yards astern of the line of departure, so Colonel Hart directed Companies A and B to plug the gap. No sooner had those units reached the departure line than elements of Company G arrived, loaded in a mix of LVTs and LCVPs, intent on reclaiming their role as Landing Team 2's reserve. Officers were at their wits' end. Company A yielded its spot just as the red signal flag fell from the control ship and the invasion was launched at 11:12 a.m. The 23rd Marines landing craft steamed for their assigned beaches, while the bewildered 24th's coxswains started engines and set course for hostile shores about 4,000 yards out. LCI gunboats led the column, followed by armored LVTAs of the first wave with the assault infantry close behind. At roughly 1,000 yards from shore, the gunboats came alongside and opened up with rockets and rapid-firing 40mm guns, while the assault waves closed. Offshore, the Navy's naval gunfire shifted toward inland targets, and dive bombers made their final attacks on Roi. The 30 LVTAs assigned to the 23rd Marines came in hot, ripping the dense battle haze with tracer fire as they approached. But they were halted almost immediately by an anti-tank ditch only about 60 feet from the surf. The armored tractors stalled, firing from their machine guns and turreted cannons. It was 11:33 a.m. Within 20 minutes, LVTs carrying the 23rd Marines clambered ashore in the right-hand sector. Men of Companies E and F from Lieutenant Colonel Dillon's 2nd Battalion hit Red Beach 3, scrambled up a slight rise and plunged onto the pier into a pall of smoke and dust. Though there was plenty of muzzle flash overhead, little enemy fire reached them. Naval gunfire had demolished nearly every beach strongpoint, and the Japanese defenses were in ruins. Dillon's troops crossed the ditch, shot the few disoriented defenders they found, and pushed rapidly inland. By then, Company C of the 4th Tank Battalion had landed M4 Sherman mediums, followed by several light tanks from Company A. After crossing a collapsed section of the anti-tank ditch, these armor elements quickly joined the advance. Within 20 minutes of landing, the Marines had reached the 01 phase line along the lower arm of the airfield, some 200 yards inland. Company G came ashore soon after and began clearing any bypassed enemy positions. On the far left, Lieutenant Colonel Hammond's 1st Battalion landed on Red Beach 2 about 5 minutes after Dillon's men, again meeting little opposition. Captain James Scales's company veered left to assault 2 large pillboxes reported at Wendy Point, roughly 300 yards away, but found only smoldering rubble and cratered ground where the fortifications had stood, further proof of the Navy's devastating fire. Wendy Point, expected to be a hard fight, proved easy. Scales's men then raced up the western shore to reach their sector of the 01 line. Sporadic gunfire erupted from a large blockhouse called Buster 400 yards up the coast, but Marines crept close enough to silence it with grenades. While Scales's troops secured Wendy Point, Captain William Weinstein's Company B moved inland with little trouble to join Dillon's men around the crater-pitted runway, where resistance was minimal. Live Japanese were rare. Occasionally, Bangalore torpedoes or satchel charges were needed to finish off stubborn riflemen firing from trenches and debris-filled culverts. By 1 p.m., all elements were linked up and eager to press on. Colonel Jones had landed and established his regimental command post near the beach. Elated by the smooth progress, he radioed General Schmidt aboard the amphibious support ship Appalachian, boasting that the operation was a pip and that they were ready to clear the rest of the island on command. General Schmidt cautioned Jones to hold his excitement and prepare for Phase 2. Captain Robert Neiman, commander of Company C, 4th Tank Battalion, was not inclined to sit idle. His M4s sat exposed on flat, open ground, tempting the many anti-tank guns reported in the area. Preferring action to inaction, Neiman ordered an advance. His tanks rolled forward, blasting any suspicious structures with 75 mm of fire, while bow gunners cut down Japanese riflemen who bolted before the treads. Seeing the tanks move across the plain, Company A's Marines moved up to screen them, while a platoon of medium tanks crept along the western shore in support. By 1:30 p.m., several M4s were dueling with enemy machine gunners defending the northeastern runway terminus, known as Natat Circle, while the other 6 prowled the northern airstrip. Victory seemed within reach. But General Schmidt, unhappy with the unauthorized action, ordered Jones to recall his Wildcats so they would not be caught by the preparatory barrage planned for the final push. It took nearly an hour to bring the tanks back under control and restore order at the 01 line. Phase 2 was slated to begin at 3:15 p.m., with each assault battalion driving straight up its assigned half of the island. At 3:10 p.m., the cruiser Santa Fe began hammering Natat Circle with 5-inch shells. 20 minutes later, the 2nd Battalion launched, supported by a 75mm half-track firing from mid-island. Although 20mm shots crackled from Natat Circle, resistance was patchy. Marines found far more dead than alive. Within 7 minutes, Captain John Patty's Company F was clearing skeletal hangars along the northern runway, while Captain Neiman's tanks re-engaged defenders at Natat Circle. Captain Karl Grendorf's Company E pushed up on Patty's left. During the advance, 4 of Grendorf's Marines tumbled into a shell hole, mistakenly believing a nearby trench still held enemy soldiers. Unwilling to risk lives without need, Private First Class Richard Anderson had just pulled the pin on a grenade when it slipped from his grasp, and the bomb slid to the bottom of the crater. Realizing his mistake, Anderson threw himself onto the explosive to shield his comrades and later received a posthumous Medal of Honor. At first, Hammond's 1st Battalion held back to lay down, supporting fire for Dillon's troops, and did not take part in the push until 4 RPM, led by a platoon of light tanks, Captain Fred Eberhardt's Fresh Company C surged up the western shoreline, trailed by 3 75mm half-tracks. The island was littered with mangled Japanese bodies, the residue of the intense naval pounding, and the only resistance came from isolated rifle and machine gun bursts. In under an hour, Eberhardt's men were clearing Norbert Circle in the island's northwest. Only Nat Circle remained. Although Captain Neiman's tanks had silenced several enemy positions, one pillbox still spat machine gun fire in 3 directions. Colonel Dillon ordered his reserve, Captain Frank Snips's Company G, to finish it off while a half-track pounded its steel door with 75mm rounds. A demolition team moved in, and when a gap in the roof was spotted, a Marine climbed up and shoved a Bangalore torpedo into the aperture. Comrades then set off shaped charges at the embrasures. Before the dust settled, half a dozen Marines dashed inside and found 3 machine guns and 3 dead gunners. They also observed that, like many defenses on the islands, the pillboxes' firing slits faced only northeast and west, which made seaborne approaches considerably easier. By 4:45 p.m., organized resistance on Roi had ceased, though mop-up continued, and at 6:20 p.m., Colonel Jones declared the island secure. For the most part, Roi had been a straightforward victory. Namur would be far harder. Thousands of yards from Namur's beaches, the chaotic assault waves of the 24th Marines churned past rocket-spewing LCIs and surged toward the island's boiling maelstrom. Nearly 36 cannon-armed LVTs from Companies B and D of the 1st Armored Amphibian Battalion led the way, ordered to push 100 yards inland after landing. For reasons unknown, the whole wave came to a stop about 50 yards short of the surf, while the landing craft continued to hammer the unseen enemy. Minutes later, the infantry's LVTs splashed past the hesitant armored LVTAs under enemy fire. Second Lieutenant John Chapin of Company K peered over his vehicle's bow, searching for his assigned landing point at Green Beach 1. Seeing only billowing smoke and dust, he turned to consult his platoon surgeon and found the man slumped over, his skull shattered. Shaken, Chapin refocused on the island before him. Several hundred yards to his right, the amphibious tractors of 2nd Battalion beached on Green Beach 2 around noon, while Chapin's battalion hit Green 1 shortly afterward. All came ashore with machine guns blazing, intending to keep the enemy pinned 100 yards inland, but a deep anti-tank ditch halted them abruptly. Officers shouted, "Move out!" and leaped from the vehicles as covering fire intensified. Heavily laden Marines dropped 7 feet to the sand and scrambled forward a few yards to lie breathless before the ditch. On Green 1, intermittent machine gun bursts disrupted several boat teams, as Captain Albert Arsenal's Company Y and Captain Doyle Stout's Company K disembarked and lay low in the sand. Chapin asked his platoon guide about the locations of his men, but as the surgeon began to point, his hand was shredded in a spray of blood and bone. Wild-eyed, the surgeon clutched his mangled stump and began calling for a sailor, the current term for corpsman, because snipers were known to target medics who ran to help. Having lost 2 key subordinates in minutes, Chapin feared Namur might collapse into another disaster. On Green 2, elements from both assault companies became intermingled on landing, but resistance in that sector was light. Occasionally, a Japanese soldier would leap from a trench, fire a shot or two, then vanish, only to be cut down by grenades in a bayonet charge. The only serious opposition on the far right came from sporadic machine gun fire from a pillbox above Sally Point on the extreme southeastern promontory. But that too was soon suppressed with help from the heavy weapons of the 25th Marines firing from nearby Egeret Island. Boat and assault teams cleared both beaches quickly and pushed inland, only to confront unexpected difficulties. Roi had been flat and open for its airfield, but Namur was thick with foliage. The naval bombardment had shredded palms and trunks into tangled debris that, mixed with undergrowth, hid buildings, bunkers, and pillboxes. Because of this, the Marines advanced cautiously. Sometimes a lone defender would stumble from concealment to die fighting for the Emperor, accompanied by 1 or 2 others, but they were cut down in a hail of bullets. Stubborn pillboxes required demolition teams. Lesser positions were left for follow-up troops. Within 15 minutes, many units had penetrated about 200 yards. At this stage, Brink's 2nd Battalion's left flank lost contact with Brunelli's 3rd Battalion. The confusion arose after elements of Company E landed directly behind Company F on Green Beach 2. Amid the tangled vegetation, the 2 companies became intermingled, with much of Company E somehow ending up on the battalion's right flank, a complete reversal of the planned advance, and a sizable gap opened on the battalion boundary. Fortunately, about half of Captain Burley's Company G had made landfall and was immediately sent to plug the breach. But these men ran into stiffening resistance from isolated machine guns and riflemen and were halted about 175 yards from the beach. They did stumble upon a lost team from Company E, yet the reserve could not restore contact with either assault battalion. Captain Berkeley's men were not the only ones in trouble. In the 3rd Battalion sector, an assault team led by Chapin collided with Lieutenant John Power's element before a strongly defended position made from sand-filled oil drums. Every attempt to bypass it was met by withering fire. Chapin and Power crouched behind a concrete wall 25 feet away to plan. Under heavy covering fire, Power led 2 automatic riflemen to the rear entrance, while Chapin and another Marine, armed with a Bangalore torpedo, crept to a narrow forward entrance. Chapin tossed a grenade to buy time as his companion shoved the torpedo home. Both rolled away just as the entrance collapsed in smoke and dust. With the way cleared, they soon joined Lieutenant Power, who had somehow obtained a shaped charge, and Power then led the assault, and the rear entrance disappeared in a growing roar as the bunker fell silent. Chapin then noticed blood seeping from Power's midsection, but Power shrugged it off and rejoined his unit. Shortly afterward, Power tackled another threatening pillbox. He and a demolition man darted forward, set their charge against the door, and then winced as the blast tore a jagged opening. Pressing a hand to his bleeding stomach, Power shoved his carbine into the gap and emptied the magazine. As he paused to reload, shots came from inside. One struck him in the gut, and another ripped out his throat. Furious, his comrades surged forward and finished the fight. Power later received a posthumous Medal of Honor. Despite such heroic exploits, enemy resistance remained sporadic but vicious. Captain Milton Cern's Company B hit Green Beach 1 at 12:45 p.m. and began clearing the area. 3 light tanks from Company B, 4th Tank Battalion, bogged down in soft sand and shell craters, as crews dismounted to free the vehicles. About 3 dozen Japanese poured from supposedly empty pillboxes and charged the tank crews, only to be cut down by small arms, with 2 prisoners captured at the cost of 1 Marine. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Colonel Brunelli's battalion pushed steadily up Namur's western half, hugging the coast as units pressed toward the 01 phase line, defined roughly by an east-west road called Sycamore Boulevard about 2/3 inland. Debris from the bombardment hid that landmark, however, making it hard for commanders on the ground to locate. To the east, the right flank of Lieutenant Colonel Brink's disordered 2nd Battalion came under heavy machine gun fire from a solid blockhouse guarding Nut Lane near 9 Point. And less than 200 yards left of that other elements stalled short of Sycamore when a large bunker loomed ahead. Though it showed no outward signs of occupancy, commanders feared bypassing it would invite heavy flanking fire or a counterattack, so sappers were called in. An assault force under Lieutenant Salstein of Company F approached from the left, while Lieutenant Joseph E. L. Pree's group from Company E closed on the right. Demolition teams set a shaped charge against the bunker's wall and pulled back. When it detonated, 20 or more occupants fled into the surrounding scrub, apparently convinced they had survived a lethal blast. But as the awaiting sappers moved in with satchel charges and dropped them into the gaping maw, everything within sight detonated in a single catastrophic explosion. Smoke, fire, and chunks of concrete shot skyward like volcanic debris, raising a dark, gritty cloud to more than 1,000 feet. Men stunned by the blast were thrown to the ground, trees were uprooted, and the lagoon's surge halted incoming landing craft. 1 Marine from Company F was blown out into the sea and later, impossibly, rescued intact by Navy crews. An aerial observer reported that a whole part of the island seemed to have blown up. At the blast, every face on adjacent Roi snapped toward Namur as if on parade. Many assumed the island had been wiped out, or that the Navy had resumed heavy shelling, or that a 500 or 1,000-pound bomb had been accidentally dropped. Subsequent investigation showed the bunker had been a munitions magazine storing more than 100 torpedo warheads that were detonated by the demolition team's charges. A heavy brown cloud rolled from the epicenter and spread over Namur like something foul. Marines gagged and choked on acrid fumes. Some cried gas as they scrambled for masks they had discarded earlier. The devastation worsened as massive slabs of reinforced concrete and shattered timber rained down like falling meteors. Some fragments splashed far out to sea. At least 1 Marine was crushed by the avalanche of debris and many others were wounded. Dozens of stowed warheads tumbled from wreckage and several detonated on impact, producing 2 more savage blasts that rocked the front. For a time, chaos ruled. About 20 Marines were killed and roughly 100 wounded. Company F suffered especially badly, 14 killed, including a lieutenant, and 43 wounded. Lieutenant Colonel Brink was hurt but refused evacuation and immediately called up his newly landed reserve, Company A, to shore up his shattered command. These demoralizing events halted the regiment's momentum and seemed to galvanize the defenders. Suddenly the whole front erupted with the distinctive chatter of Nambu machine guns and the crack of Arisaka rifles. From that moment the battle took a grim turn. What had been a steady advance against scattered, poorly organized foes deteriorated into slow, inch-by-inch fighting. By 2 p.m., most units had reached Sycamore Boulevard, but every attempt to cross was beaten back by intense machine gun fire from 3 well-placed blockhouses facing the 2nd Battalion's sector, one at Nut Lane in the island's center, another at the end of Nut Lane near Nan Point on the east coast, and a third at an intersection called Road Junction 58, so the tempo stalled and then ground to a halt. The rear entrance was obliterated in an ear-splitting roar, the bunker falling instantly mute. Chapin then noticed blood seeping from Power's abdomen, but Power waved it off and rejoined his men, refusing to be hauled back. Almost at once, he and a demolitions man darted toward another hostile pillbox, set their charge against the door, and watched it tear open a jagged breach. Pressing one hand to his wounded midriff, Power thrust his carbine into the torn aperture and emptied the magazine. As he paused to replace the spent magazine, shots rang out from within. One round ripped into his gut, and a subsequent bullet tore through his throat. Enraged, his comrades surged forward and finished the defenders. Power would later be awarded the Medal of Honor posthumously. For all the individual heroics, the Japanese reply remained intermittent but brutal. At 12:45 p.m., Captain Milton Cern's Company B came ashore on Green Beach 1 and began systematic clearing. 3 light tanks from Company B, 4th Tank Battalion, followed but quickly bogged down in soft sand and shell crater churn. While crews abandoned efforts to extricate the vehicles, nearly 30 Japanese troops poured from pillboxes thought empty and charged, only to be cut down by small arms fire. 2 taken prisoner at the cost of 1 Marine. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Colonel Brunelli's unit pushed steadily up Namur's western sector, hugging the shoreline as its squadrons closed on the 01 phase line, roughly marked by an east-west thoroughfare called Sycamore Boulevard about 2/3 inland. Although the road itself was obscured by tangled wreckage and vegetation, confounding commanders who tried to orient their assault. To the east, the badly disordered 2nd Battalion under Lieutenant Colonel Brink came under heavy machine gun fire from a fortified blockhouse guarding Nut Lane near 9 Point, and not far to the left another massive bunker loomed out of the shattered foliage. There was no clear sign the emplacement was manned, but ground commanders feared any attempt to bypass it would invite deadly flanking fire or a counterstrike from hidden enemies. Demolitions teams were summoned. An assault element led by Lieutenant Salstein of Company F probed from one side while Lieutenant Joseph Elpry's men of Company E closed from the other. Sappers planted a shaped charge against the bunker wall and fell back. When it detonated, some defenders fled into the bush, apparently thinking they had survived a fatal blast, so the sappers hurled satchel charges into the opening. What followed was cataclysmic. The entire structure detonated in a single, monstrous explosion that sent columns of smoke, fire, and concrete shards skyward, lofting a choking, sooty cloud more than 1,000 feet into the air. The concussion slammed men and trees to the ground and heaved the lagoon so hard that incoming landing craft stalled in the water. 1 Marine from Company F was blown clear into the sea and miraculously later plucked from the water alive by Navy rescuers. Observers in the air reported what looked like an island exploding. On neighboring Roi, every face snapped toward Namur as if on command, many convinced the whole place had been wiped out or that the guns had resumed their barrage or that a large bomb had fallen by accident. Post-blast investigations revealed the bunker had been a munitions magazine packed with more than 100 torpedo warheads, and the sappers' charges set off a chain of detonations. A thick brown cloud rolled across Namur, acrid and choking. Men gagged and gasped, some shouting gas as they frantically sought gas masks they had discarded earlier as useless. Massive slabs of reinforced concrete and splintered timbers rained down like falling meteors, crushing and maiming. At least one Marine was crushed outright and dozens more were wounded. Scores of warheads tumbled free from the wreckage and several detonated on impact, producing 2 more savage blasts that rocked the front. For a time, the battlefield dissolved into chaos. About 20 Marines lay dead and roughly 100 were wounded. Company F bore the brunt, 14 killed, including a lieutenant, and 43 wounded. Lieutenant Colonel Brink himself was wounded, but refused evacuation, immediately calling up his newly landed reserve Company A to steady his shattered line. These blows sapped morale and appeared to spur the Japanese. Suddenly, the entire front erupted in the staccato rattle of Nambu machine guns and the sharpened crack of Arisaka rifles, and what had been a methodical advance against scattered, poorly coordinated defenders degenerated into a grinding, inch-by-inch slugging match. By 2 p.m., most Marine elements had reached Sycamore Boulevard, but every bid to cross it was met with murderous machine gun fire from 3 well-positioned blockhouses fronting the 2nd Battalion sector, one at Nut Lane in the island center, another near Nan Point on the east shore, and a third at an intersection labeled Road Junction 58, so the tempo slowed and eventually stalled. Command and control ashore began to solidify as the regimental command post established itself. Units reorganized, men tended the wounded and rearmed, and bitter experience made leaders cautious about pushing too far that afternoon. Nightfall would bring its own terrors, but for the moment the Marines dug in, held their ground, and tried to prepare for the next day's operations, knowing too well that Japanese infiltration and night counterattacks could